The room was cold on purpose. Not the kind of cold that drifted in through a cracked window or clung to winter coats left on chair backs. This cold was engineered, calculated. The thermostat on the wall hummed quietly at 62 degrees, low enough to make skin tighten, low enough to remind everyone in the room that comfort was optional here. Ethan Crowell liked it that way. He sat at the head of the long conference table inside a downtown Chicago law office that charged more per hour than most people earned in a week. The table itself was black walnut, polished to a mirror sheen. The walls were glass, frosted just enough to blur the skyline beyond. Everything in the room said control. Control of money, control of outcomes, control of people who walked in believing they had none. Across from him sat Claire Morgan, for the moment, at least. She wore a simple gray coat over a navy dress, the kind of thing a woman wore when she didn't want to be noticed. Her hands rested calmly in her lap. No rings, no watch, no jewelry except a thin silver chain at her neck, barely visible above the collar. Ethan noticed all of it. He always noticed what people removed before they sat down. He had built an empire on that instinct. "Let's not drag this out," he said, tapping the edge of a manila folder with his knuckle. The sound echoed louder than it should have in the sterile quiet. "We both said what needs to be said." Claire didn't answer. Her attorney, a middle-aged man named Harold Reeves, shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Harold was competent in the way small-market lawyers were competent. Good with paperwork. Careful with language, intimidated by rooms like this. Ethan had known that before he ever walked in. His legal team had known it too. Ethan leaned back, crossing one leg over the other. Italian leather shoes. Custom suit. Navy, not black. Black was for men trying too hard. "Sign the papers, Claire," he said, his voice calm, almost generous. "You're lucky I'm even offering what I am." He slid the folder across the table, stopping just short of her fingertips. Inside were 37 pages of legal finality, asset separation, property disposition, a marriage reduced to line items and exclusions. Claire glanced down, then back up at him. "Lucky," she repeated softly. Ethan smiled. Not cruelly. Not yet. This was the part he enjoyed, the moment when people realized the ground beneath them wasn't solid anymore. "Yes," he said. "Lucky. You walk away clean. No debt. No litigation. No ugly headlines. You keep the car, your personal belongings, and a settlement." He paused, letting the word hang. "Symbolic," he added. Jessica Lane, seated 2 chairs down on Ethan's right, laughed under her breath. She didn't bother to hide it. 26 years old, public relations consultant, blonde hair pulled into a sleek ponytail, phone face down on the table, but vibrating every few minutes with notifications she was pretending not to care about. Claire felt the vibration more than she heard it. Ethan continued, "You weren't a partner, Claire. You were support. And support roles don't come with equity." Harold cleared his throat. "Mr. Crowell, under Illinois equitable distribution statutes." Ethan raised a hand without looking at him. "Equitable," Ethan said, his tone sharpening just slightly, "doesn't mean equal, especially when one party built the company, assumed the risk, and created the value." He finally looked at Claire again. "You hosted dinners," he said, "picked paint colors, smiled in photos, and I appreciate that. Truly, but let's not rewrite history." Claire's eyes dropped back to the document. "Zero alimony, personal effects. Vehicle, 2019 Lexus sedan. Lump sum settlement, $1. She read it twice to make sure she hadn't misunderstood. $1. Her breath didn't hitch. Her face didn't change. That was the part Ethan found most irritating. "Don't look so shocked," he said. "It's symbolic. It reflects exactly what you contributed to Crowell's systems. Jessica snorted. Honestly, that's generous. Harold shifted again. Mr. Crowell, this is highly irregular. Mrs. Crowell supported you during the early years. She paid rent. She watched, Ethan snapped. Then quieter, more dangerous. And watching is an ownership. He leaned forward now, resting his forearms on the table. The cold didn't bother him. He liked it. It kept everyone else off balance. If you fight this, he said, lowering his voice, I will bury you in legal fees. I will drag this out until every savings account you have is gone. Or you can sign this, take your dollar, and disappear. The room went still. This was the moment Ethan expected tears. Or anger. Or begging. Claire did none of it. She sat there, silent, her eyes tracing the edge of the table, as if measuring something no one else could see. A memory flickered, brief, uninvited. A garage in Evanston. Years ago, the smell of motor oil and dust. Ethan pacing while she sat on a crate with a laptop, quietly correcting lines of code he swore were perfect. The memory was gone as quickly as it came. She picked up the pen. Harold inhaled sharply, as if to protest, but she stopped him with a small shake of her head. There's one amendment, she said. Ethan rolled his eyes. Of course there is. She didn't rise to the tone. I want the warehouse. The pen paused in Ethan's hand. The warehouse? Jessica repeated, laughing openly now. You mean that dump on Foundry Lane? The one full of rats. Ethan frowned. The old foundry property had been a nuisance for years. An industrial relic in a forgotten part of the city. Rusted beams. Environmental headaches. A tax sinkhole he'd never bothered to clean up. That place is a liability, he said. The property taxes alone. I know, Claire said. That was all. Ethan studied her. There was no emotion in her voice. No nostalgia. No desperation. Why? He asked. She met his eyes for the first time since the meeting began. Sentimental value. Jessica laughed again. You're joking. Claire didn't respond. Ethan shrugged, already bored. This was easy. This was nothing. He scribbled a quick amendment in the margin, initialed it, and slid the document back toward her. Done, he said. Take it. Just don't come crying when the city condemns it. Claire signed. Claire Morgan. She placed the pen down gently. Goodbye, Ethan, she said, standing. She didn't look at Jessica. She didn't look back at the skyline. She walked out of the room as if nothing of value had been left behind. Ethan exhaled, satisfied. That went well, Jessica said, already reaching for her phone. Maldives in 6 hours. I'm posting the sunset. Ethan smiled, leaning back again. He believed it was over. Outside, the Chicago wind cut through Claire's coat as she stepped onto the sidewalk. The city moved around her. Taxis, horns, strangers rushing past with places to be. She stopped under the shadow of the building and pulled out her phone. There was one number she hadn't called in years. It rang once, then twice. A man answered. His voice was calm. Old money calm. Mercer residence. It's Claire, she said. Her voice didn't shake. Tell my grandfather I'm ready. She ended the call before he could respond. Behind her, high above the street, Ethan Crowell laughed inside a room that had been designed to make people feel small. He had no idea he'd just signed away the only thing that ever protected him. The warehouse sat at the edge of the city where the streetlights stopped trying. Chicago didn't bother with this part of town anymore. The pavement was cracked, the buildings half forgotten, the air thick with the smell of metal and damp concrete. It was the kind of place developers talked about in future tense, and investors avoided in the present. Claire unlocked the door herself. The mechanism protested, grinding loudly before giving way. The sound echoed inside the building, bouncing off steel beams and empty space. She stepped in and pulled the door shut behind her, sealing herself into the cold. It was darker than she remembered. She stood still for a moment, letting her eyes adjust, letting the silence settle. The warehouse wasn't dead. It was waiting. The kind of waiting that didn't rush you, didn't need to announce itself. Her heels clicked once against the concrete floor. The sound traveled farther than it should have. She walked deeper inside, past rusted shelving and stacks of forgotten pallets. The air was colder here than outside, a natural chill that settled into the bones. Somewhere above her, water dripped steadily, each drop spaced far enough apart to make time feel stretched. This was what Ethan had laughed about, the liability, the joke he'd tossed at her like an afterthought, certain it would collapse under its own weight. Claire stopped near the center of the space and looked up. The ceiling disappeared into shadows, beams crossing like a skeleton holding itself upright through sheer stubbornness. She took off her coat and folded it over one arm, not because she was comfortable, because she didn't intend to leave quickly. Her phone vibrated. One message. "You're clear." No one followed. She slipped the phone back into her pocket without replying. Near the far wall stood a workbench, old but solid. Someone had tried to cover it with a tarp years ago, then given up halfway through. Claire pulled the tarp back with one hand. Dust rose and settled. On the bench sat a small metal box. Industrial, scratched, locked. She stared at it without touching it. A brief memory surfaced, not emotional, not warm. Ethan standing in their kitchen years ago. Paper spread across the counter, snapping at her for asking a question. "Just trust me, this stuff isn't your world." The memory didn't linger. She stepped away from the bench and moved along the wall instead, fingers trailing over brick until she felt it. A seam. Her hand paused, then pressed. A narrow panel slid open with a quiet, reluctant scrape. Inside was a shallow recess. Nothing flashy, just a space hidden in plain sight. Claire reached in and pulled out a single folder, sealed in plastic. She didn't open it. She didn't need to. She knew exactly what was inside. The folder went into her bag. Footsteps sounded outside. Claire didn't turn. The warehouse door opened, letting in a thin slice of gray daylight and a man who didn't announce himself. Whitaker Mercer stepped inside like the building belonged to him. He was tall, silver-haired, and carried himself with the calm certainty of someone who'd never had to ask for permission. He didn't look surprised to see her there. "Still standing," he said. Claire turned. "You taught me that." He looked around the space, unimpressed. "You chose well." "I chose quietly," she corrected. Mercer nodded once. Approval, not praise. "You let him think you lost," he said. "Yes." And he believed it. "Yes." Mercer studied her face. "That's important." She shrugged slightly. He needed to. Mercer walked a few steps farther into the warehouse, stopping near the workbench. His eyes flicked to the tarp, then away. "You're sure?" he asked. Claire met his gaze. "I'm certain." Mercer didn't ask what she meant. He didn't need to. "That building," he said, gesturing vaguely, "is worth more than he knows." "It always was," Claire replied. Mercer turned toward the exit. "The board meeting is Monday. He thinks he's buying something." Claire's expression didn't change. "He always does." Mercer paused at the door. "You won't speak first." "I won't speak at all," Claire said. That earned her another nod. "Good," Mercer said. "Let the room do the work." The door closed behind him. Claire was alone again. She stood in the center of the warehouse, the silence settling back into place, heavier now, but more precise. She reached into her bag and touched the edge of the folder, not opening it, Not yet. Outside, somewhere across the city, Ethan Crowell was probably celebrating the efficiency of the divorce. The clean ending. The dollar that proved his dominance. Claire exhaled slowly. The warehouse didn't echo this time, because some spaces didn't need noise to remember. They only needed time. Ethan Crowell liked Mondays. They felt efficient, predictable. The markets were open, the staff was alert, and the world still believed in momentum. By the time his driver eased the car into the underground garage beneath Crowell Systems' tower, Ethan was already rehearsing the version of the day that would later be retold. How he had navigated a delicate negotiation, how he had secured a future-facing partnership, how control had remained exactly where it belonged. He straightened his jacket as the elevator climbed. 32 floors up, the boardroom lights were already on. The room had been redesigned 3 years earlier at Ethan's insistence. He'd removed the warmer wood finishes, replaced them with steel, glass, and black stone. Comfort dulled authority. Cold sharpened it. The air conditioning hummed softly, set lower than necessary. Ethan liked watching people react to that first. He took his seat at the head of the table, placing his phone face down beside a leather-bound notebook. One by one, the board members filtered in, men and women who smiled too quickly, nodded too often, and never quite met his eyes long enough to challenge him. Jessica arrived last. She slipped into the chair nearest Ethan, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. She leaned in, whispering something about a magazine feature and a dinner reservation later that evening. Ethan nodded without listening. His attention was already on the door. "This will be quick," he said aloud, glancing at his watch. "We're here to finalize alignment, not debate." No one argued. The meeting began the way all Ethan's meetings did, with him speaking first, longest and loudest. He walked them through projections, through numbers polished to the point of fiction. He spoke of Aurelius as if it were already his. "They're innovative," he said, "but they lack scale. We provide that. They'll retain creative input, of course, but operational control remains here." Heads nodded. Someone asked a question about valuation. Ethan waved it away. "Details," he said. "We're buying capability, not competition." The door at the far end of the room opened. The sound cut through the conversation cleanly. Ethan didn't turn immediately. He didn't need to. No one entered his meetings without notice. But the footsteps were unhurried, confident, not apologetic. He frowned slightly and looked up. A woman stepped into the room. She wore a dark tailored suit, cut sharp enough to hold its shape without movement. Her hair was pulled back neatly. No jewelry, except a thin chain at her neck. She didn't scan the room. She didn't look uncertain. She walked straight to the seat opposite Ethan and placed a folder on the table. Ethan stared. The room went quiet. For a moment, his mind tried to correct the image, tried to reframe it as coincidence, as resemblance. But the longer she stood there, the more the air seemed to thin. "Good morning," she said. Her voice was steady, familiar. Jessica's chair scraped softly against the floor as she shifted. Ethan stood abruptly, his palms flattening against the table. "What is this?" he demanded. "Who let you in here?" The woman didn't answer him. Instead, she took her seat. The silence stretched. No one spoke. No one moved. Ethan's heartbeat grew louder in his ears. "This meeting is private," he said, forcing control back into his voice. "Security." "Sit down, Ethan," she said. It wasn't loud. It wasn't angry. It was final. Ethan froze. He stared at her face, at the familiar line of her jaw, the eyes he had once dismissed as soft. "Claire?" he said, the name slipping out before he could stop it. A murmur rippled around the table. Claire met his gaze calmly. "Hello, Ethan." Jessica laughed, sharp and confused. "Is this a joke? Why is she here?" No one answered her. A man Ethan recognized from Aurelius' legal team stepped forward, clearing his throat. "Mr. Crowell," he said, "this meeting has been restructured." Ethan snapped his head toward him. "What are you talking about?" The lawyer slid a document across the table. Ethan didn't touch it. Per the terms distributed last night, the man continued, "Aurelius Solutions is not here to be acquired." Ethan laughed once, brittle. "That's not what my CFO was told." Claire finished for him. "Because that's what you needed to hear." The room felt colder. Ethan's eyes darted around the table, searching for reassurance, for familiarity. None came. Even the board members avoided his gaze now. "This is a mistake," he said. "Claire, whatever this is." "It's business," she said. "You taught me that." She opened the folder and slid its contents forward. Ethan glanced down, and then he stopped breathing. At the top of the page was a familiar heading. Crowell Systems, Original Incorporation Draft. Below it were signatures. His and hers. His name felt heavy in his chest. Jessica leaned forward, squinting. "What is that?" Claire didn't look at her. "Something you filed an amendment to erase," Claire said, her voice even. "Quietly. Illegally." Ethan's mouth opened, closed. "That document," Claire continued, "is one of several. Others have already been submitted to the SEC. A sharp inhale from somewhere down the table. Ethan's chair creaked as he sank back into it. "This isn't over," he said hoarsely. "You can't just walk in here and—" "I'm not walking in," Claire said. "I'm taking over." She nodded once to the Aurelius lawyer. "The acquisition stands," he said, "but not the way you imagined." Another document slid across the table, stopping inches from Ethan's hand. He stared at it, not reading, already understanding. "This offer reflects current market reality," Claire said. "Your product failures, your undisclosed risks, your omissions." Ethan shook his head slowly. "You don't have the authority." Claire's gaze didn't waver. "Read the line beneath my name," she said. He did. Founder. Co-owner. The room felt like it tilted. Jessica stood up abruptly. "This is insane. Ethan, say something." Ethan didn't. Claire leaned forward slightly. "I'm not interested in humiliating you," she said. "That's already happening." Her eyes flicked briefly around the table, to the faces watching him now with a kind of detached curiosity. "I'm interested in closure." She slid the final page toward him. A signature line waited at the bottom. "You have a choice," she said. "Sign and walk out quietly. Or don't, and let the investigation speak for you." Ethan stared at the pen. It was the same brand he'd handed her months ago. The irony pressed down on him, slow and suffocating. Around them, the room remained silent, waiting. The pen was heavier than Ethan remembered. It lay on the table between them, angled toward him, black lacquer catching the overhead light. The room had gone completely still. Even the hum of the air conditioning seemed louder now, like a reminder that time hadn't stopped, only shifted. Ethan didn't touch it. He stared at the signature line, at the blank space waiting for his name, and felt something unfamiliar tighten in his chest. Not anger, not panic, exposure. This wasn't a fight. There were no raised voices, no dramatic accusations. No one was rushing him. No one needed to. That was the worst part. "This is coercion," he said finally, his voice thinner than he intended. "You're forcing my hand." Claire didn't respond right away. She looked down the length of the table instead, at the board members who had spent years orbiting Ethan's authority. A few avoided her gaze. Others met it briefly, then looked away, already recalibrating where power lived now. "No one forced you to erase me," she said. Ethan flinched. A memory surfaced without warning. him standing in a hallway outside a hospital room. Phone pressed his ear, whispering to a lawyer about amended filings while a nurse waited to ask him a question he didn't want to answer. "She won't notice," he'd said then. "She trusts me." The memory passed. Claire continued, her voice steady. "No one forced you to file altered documents, or misrepresent ownership, or dismiss engineers who question your timelines." Jessica scoffed. "This is ridiculous. You're acting like the company belongs to me?" Claire finished calmly. Jessica froze. Claire turned to her for the first time. "You're sitting in a chair that doesn't exist anymore," Claire said. "You might want to stand." The words weren't cruel. They weren't loud. They were accurate. Jessica looked at Ethan, waiting for him to correct it, to protect her. He didn't. Her face flushed. She grabbed her bag and stood abruptly, heels scraping again as she backed away from the table. No one followed her movement. No one acknowledged it. She wasn't important anymore. Ethan swallowed. "You planned this," he said quietly. Claire nodded. "Yes." "How long?" She considered the question. "Since the day you told me I didn't understand the business," she said. "I started writing everything down after that." Ethan's jaw tightened. "You stayed." "I observed," Claire corrected. "There's a difference." She leaned back slightly in her chair, hands folded neatly in front of her. The posture wasn't aggressive. It wasn't defensive. It was settled. "You always believed control was loud," she said. "Meetings, presentations, headlines." Ethan's eyes flicked to the glass walls of the boardroom, to the skyline beyond them. "And you believed silence meant weakness," she added. The pen remained untouched. A man at the far end of the table, one of the older board members, cleared his throat. "Ethan," he said cautiously, "we need to consider the legal exposure here." Ethan shot him a look. "You're taking her side?" The man hesitated. "We're taking the company's side." That word, company, landed differently now. Claire reached into her folder and slid one more document forward. "This is the staff retention plan," she said. "Every engineer you terminated in the last 3 years has been offered reinstatement." Ethan's eyes snapped back to her. "You already contacted them?" "Yes." "When?" "Before you walked into this room." He laughed once, hollow. "You don't even own the company yet." Claire met his gaze evenly. "I do." The Aurelius lawyer spoke again. "Effective as of this morning, voting control transferred under the acquisition agreement." Ethan's stomach dropped. "This meeting," the lawyer continued, "is no longer yours to run." Silence. The board members shifted in their seats. Small movements that said more than words ever could. They weren't waiting for Ethan anymore. They were waiting for her. Ethan looked at Claire, really looked at her, as if trying to find the woman he thought he'd left with nothing. "You don't have to do this," he said quietly. Claire's expression didn't soften. "I already did," she replied. She pushed the pen toward him. "This isn't punishment," she said. "It's resolution." Ethan's hand hovered over the table, trembling just slightly. He thought of headlines, of depositions, of nights spent explaining himself to people who no longer admired him. He thought of the warehouse he'd laughed about, the liability he'd signed away for nothing. $1. Slowly, deliberately, Ethan picked up the pen. The sound of it clicking open felt louder than it should have. He signed. When he was done, he set the pen down and leaned back in his chair, as if suddenly exhausted. No one clapped. No one spoke. Claire stood. "Thank you for your time," she said to the room. She didn't look at Ethan as she walked toward the door. Behind her, the board members began to move again. Quiet conversation starting up, schedules adjusting, power reorganizing itself without ceremony. Ethan remained seated. By the time he looked up, Claire was gone, outside the boardroom. The hallway stretched long and empty, the carpet absorbing the sound of her footsteps as she walked away. She didn't check her phone. She didn't smile. The work wasn't finished yet, but the room had already frozen once, and it would remember her name. The lobby of Crowell Systems Tower was louder than the boardroom had been. Phones rang. Security gates chimed. Shoes crossed polished marble in steady, indifferent rhythms. The building hadn't noticed the transfer of power yet. It still moved on habit, not awareness. Ethan Crowell stepped out of the private elevator alone. The doors closed behind him without ceremony. He stood there for a moment, disoriented by the openness of the space. For years, this lobby had felt like an extension of his office. Staff straightening when he passed, visitors pausing just a little too long to look at him, security nodding before he reached the desk. Now no one reacted. A receptionist glanced up briefly, then back to her screen. Ethan adjusted his jacket, straightening it out of instinct. He walked toward the exit, his pace measured, controlled. He refused to rush. Rushing would mean acknowledging that something had shifted. Outside, the city greeted him with noise and wind. Chicago didn't care who owned what. He stopped at the curb, waiting for his driver. The black sedan he expected didn't arrive. Minutes passed. A valet approached, younger than most, holding a small ticket. "Sir," the valet said, polite but unsure, "are you waiting for a pickup?" "Yes," Ethan said shortly. "Crowell car." The valet glanced at the ticket again. "I don't see that on the list." Ethan frowned. "Check again." The valet did. His expression changed, not dramatically, just enough. "There's a vehicle registered under Claire Morgan," he said. "Not Crowell." The name landed heavier than it had in the boardroom. "That's my—" Ethan stopped himself. "That's a mistake." The valet shook his head. "I don't think so, sir." Ethan looked past him, scanning the line of cars. He recognized none of them as his. Inside the building, an email alert chimed somewhere. Then another. On the other side of the glass doors, employees were slowing down, phones appearing in hands, heads tilting together in small, quiet clusters. The news was spreading. Ethan's phone vibrated. A message from his CFO. "Accounts frozen pending review. Call me immediately." Another followed before he could respond. Board has scheduled an emergency compliance audit. Media inquiries incoming. Ethan stared at the screen. This wasn't collapse. It was suffocation. He typed a reply, deleted it, typed again. Nothing sounded right. Nothing sounded authoritative anymore. Across the street, a black sedan pulled up. The driver stepped out and opened the rear door. Claire emerged. She wore the same suit from the boardroom, her posture unchanged. She didn't look at Ethan at first. She spoke quietly to the driver, accepted a folder, then turned. Their eyes met. For a moment, the city noise fell away. Ethan opened his mouth, then closed it again. There was nothing left that wouldn't sound like pleading. Claire stepped closer, stopping a few feet from him. The valet instinctively took a step back. "I didn't plan this part," Ethan said finally. His voice was low, raw. "You humiliated me." Claire studied him, not with satisfaction, not with anger, with distance. "You humiliated yourself," she said. "I documented it." He swallowed. "You could have taken the money. You could have left." "I did leave," she replied. "You just didn't notice." A small crowd had begun to gather inside the lobby, pretending not to watch. Ethan felt their presence without looking. "What happens now?" he asked. Claire considered him for a moment longer than necessary. "Now," she said, "you wait." "For what?" "For consequences." She turned away before he could respond. The driver opened the car door for her. She slid into the back seat, setting the folder beside her. The door closed. The car pulled away. Ethan remained on the curb, the wind tugging at his coat, the building behind him reflecting his image back in glass. Smaller than he remembered. Inside the sedan, Claire opened the folder. A single document rested on top. Crowell Systems, renaming proposal. She closed it again. Not yet. Outside, the city swallowed Ethan Crowell whole, indifferent and efficient, already moving on to the next name. The hearing room was quieter than Ethan expected. No cameras, no shouting, no crowd pressing in for spectacle. Just a long table, a few sealed folders, and a wall clock that ticked steadily, indifferent to the fact that his life had narrowed to a series of questions with no generous answers. Ethan sat alone. Across from him, 3 officials reviewed documents without looking up. Their expressions were neutral, practiced. They didn't need to intimidate him. The paper in front of them did that work already. Mr. Crowell, one of them said, finally lifting his eyes, "Do you acknowledge that you signed the amended incorporation filings dated March 14th, for years ago?" Ethan nodded. "Yes." "And do you acknowledge that the original filing listed a second founder?" His throat tightened. "Yes." "Do you acknowledge that the amendment removed that founder without disclosure or consent?" Ethan hesitated. The pause lasted only a second, but it was enough. "Yes," he said. The official made a note. No reaction. No judgment. Just documentation. That was a pattern. Question. Answer. Record. Sentence. Assembled quietly. Ethan glanced at the empty chair beside him. His lawyers had advised him to attend alone. Optics, they'd said. Cooperation. Accountability. Claire was not there. She hadn't needed to be. Her absence weighed more than her presence ever could have. Hours later, Ethan stepped back onto the sidewalk, blinking against daylight. The city moved around him again, but differently now. He felt in the way people brushed past without apology, in the lack of recognition on their faces. His phone buzzed. A message from his bank. Access restricted pending review. Another followed. Corporate accounts reassigned. Personal guarantees under assessment. He slipped the phone into his pocket. There was nothing left to say. Across town, in a building with no name on the door, Claire stood at a window overlooking the river. The office wasn't lavish. No skyline views meant to impress. Just clean lines, quiet hallways, and a sense of purpose that didn't need to announce itself. A woman entered the room, placing a slim folder on the desk. "The renaming documents are ready," she said. "Staff transition is complete. No disruption." Claire nodded. "And the engineers?" "Everyone who accepted has started onboarding." Claire turned from the window and picked up the folder. She didn't open it immediately. "Any press requests?" she asked. "A few," the woman replied. "We declined. No statements." "Good." The woman hesitated. "People are curious." Claire allowed herself a small pause. "Curiosity fades," she said. "Structure doesn't." The woman nodded and left. Claire opened the folder at last. At the top of the page was a single line of text. "Morgan Systems, effective immediately." She read it once, then closed it again, not because it overwhelmed her, because it didn't. Outside, the river moved steadily, carrying reflections of buildings that had outlasted countless names. Elsewhere, Ethan stood at a crosswalk, waiting for the signal to change. He checked his phone again, then stopped. There was no one left to call who could reverse what had already been documented. The light changed. He crossed with the crowd, unnoticed. A few blocks away, a billboard still bore his company's logo. It would come down soon. Permits were already filed. Claire watched from her office as the city shifted beneath a sky that didn't care who rose or fell. She didn't smile. She didn't feel victorious. She felt finished. Somewhere, in a room designed to make people feel small, a name had frozen everything. And then quietly it had moved on,